I'm really just excited to be able to sit down with an audience and see, again, like, how they react, because I think, in the same way that I think you can go into Chasing Amy and get something out of it that you might be looking for unconsciously, or it'll confirm something that you think. I think the same thing can be said for Chasing Amy.
I watched the film yesterday and was just moved from start to finish. It's beautiful. It's funny. It's so many great things. And I know in the documentary you explore a little bit about, how it transformed after a certain point in your original process. But what was it like for you, in that moment, figuring out how to pivot the documentary away from exploring this legacy to how it impacted you personally?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of great conversations had with, the other producers on this project, our editor, Sharika, our AE, Lauren, even our DP, Bradley Garrison, or one of our DPs, Bradley Garrison. There are so many great collaborators on this thing that, when you hear a note enough times, you feel compelled to listen. So you hear it once, it's like, all right, I'll consider it. You hear it twice, it's like, all right, well, this could be a pattern. You hear it 20 to 50 times over the course of a project. You should really listen, because people are trying to tell you the truth. And I think that's the greatest gift that somebody can give you, is the truth. And I'm very thankful that we had such a good team on this that was willing to be honest with me, because I had set out to make a pretty straight documentary that was about the intersection of the LGBTQ community and Chasing Amy, and what good representation looks like versus bad representation, right? And it became increasingly more personal over time. And while I, dug in my heels and didn't want to as a person, I also recognized as a storyteller that, yeah, this probably is the best version of the story. Now, how do we do it the right way? And that's what we tried to accomplish here.
Well, I think it was handled very well. I mean, it sometimes that can be quite jarring to go from one subject to another, but I think you handled the segue between them very well. Riley, I'll come to you next. I mean, what was it like when Sav here approached you with the idea of being on camera and being a very pivotal part of this documentary, as much as being a part of his life?
Well, it's very interesting because people think it was like he approached me with like some kind of proposal or like a release, like, okay, here's the thing, just sign it. It was a very gradual thing, because like I have been like stuck to him since way before like the documentary started being like such a solid thing, a thing that was like so mapped out. So I was just like there, and like the content that is in the documentary is just like very organic. Since we were long distance, it's the stuff that we had, like the material that just like came to life in our day-to-day life. So it was just like, okay, so there's been a little bit of a change of plans, and it wasn't even like that, because I was sitting basically next to him while all of this was happening, and I could just kind of tell that, yeah, he was just like being more and more immersed in the documentary as a subject, more than just like the director or like the mastermind behind it. So it was just like, okay, he's gonna be in it, so that means I'm going to be in it. Okay, so yeah, I am his, at that moment, like his fiance, his girlfriend, whatever. I'm probably going to be in it. And he was just like, well, yes, so you're going to be featured more. And since it was his story, it was a no-brainer for me. It was just like, just making it a little bit more, just making it a little bit more official, being like, okay, so all of these things that were already happening, we're just gonna put them in the edit and making it a little bit more of a big deal, because it's like the documentary is now more about your relationship. So it was just like, for me, it just becomes like having like the best memento of our relationship, really. So that was kind of what happened.
That's very sweet. And Sav, I mean, were you nervous at all to, I mean, Riley said it was a gradual process, but were you nervous at all to really try and talk with her about having her, be as big of a part of it as you?
For sure. I mean, I didn't want to be in it, let alone rep somebody I love up in that. I think I'm pretty good at a work-life balance, generally speaking. I mean, I like to work, and I'm with somebody who understands how much I like to work. But I also, I say it in the movie, our relationship is private. And so it was kind of weird to like and I did this, but, to have a camera in our face, I could have said no at any time, but I was trying to kind of surrender to what the story became, while also navigating how uncomfortable I was on camera, let alone introducing somebody I love into it, as much as it wasn't a big deal for you, it was very important that, that trust was there of like, look, I'm not going to, you're not going to, have all of like our personal information released or anything like that. Like, it's just about, our love story a little bit there. And so I'm so thankful that she was in it.
Well, I can't think of a better way to tie in your love story with than with Chasing Amy, and a different kind of love story in a way. And
Yeah.
I mean, kind of like you were saying earlier, I love the way that you present it as both a positive and a negative representation of the LGBTQ plus community, because it really is. And the people that you talk to, I mean, there's such a great range of both people involved with the film as well as academics. I mean, how did you go about putting together the list of people who are, the people that weren't directly involved with the movie?
It was important to me and the other producers on this that there was a pretty balanced representation of who was commenting on Chasing Amy as a film and how it exists in the broader culture, because that's really where the story started from, was how does this movie exist in our culture, and what does that mean? So having an academic perspective, having, cultural writers and commentators in there, film festival programmers, people who work in entertainment, queer people, that was all super important just in terms of representing the diversity of perspectives, and also showing that like not any one community is like a monolith, right? Because you put 50 people in a room to talk about Chasing Amy, you come out with 200 different opinions, right? It's a very nuanced thing where multiple things are true at once. And so that's been, it was exciting to see kind of how all the talking heads came together in that way, because they provide such incisive commentary. And it kind of leaves it up to the audience to decide where they fall, how they personally feel, but also showing that like, it doesn't matter how it doesn't matter, what I think about Chasing Amy. This is just how Chasing Amy exists in the world and appears to all these different, really intelligent people.
With that said, was there any one person that you spoke to who really gave you, the big, outside of Joey Lauren Adams, since that was the big turning point in the movie, but of the other people that you talked to, was there any one person who you found really gave you a unique new perspective on the film that you hadn't really thought of before?
Sarah Jen's interview was fantastic. She's an academic. She's a PhD of bisexuality studies. And for her to be able to really hit the nail on the head of the specific depictions of bisexuality throughout time was just amazing. I was sitting there and I was like, oh my God, how am I going to fit this all into the movie? There could be a whole movie just about this. And so I really respected her interview, and I just loved getting to work with her that day. I was very excited about hers.
So since you mentioned having so much material from interviews, I mean, you have all the footage of you two together, you have all the footage from all of your interviews. How do you go about, in the editing process, really deciding which pieces to keep, which pieces to cut, where the line is drawn on certain aspects of conversations?
My main priority was trying to figure out what is the movie, right? There's so much in terms of rich material to pull from that we got from all of our interview subjects and participants, not just the ones who made it into the final cut. It's recorded stories of queer history. There are discussions about Chasing Amy, obviously, but also the new queer cinema movement, what it was like to be queer at certain points in time from individual perspectives. And so we had to figure out, well, what is the movie? And the movie ended up being, and this was my call, was every scene has to be about my evolving relationship to chasing Amy, or else it doesn't fit. So we did have to end up leaving a lot of things on the cutting room floor that we thought were cute or funny or interesting, but it just didn't feel like it fit into this movie. And to be able to narrow the focus that much allowed us to be able to have like a 92-minute movie, which I was very thankful for, because it would be very easy, I think, for a movie like this to drag, that has so many different story elements all happening at the same time, in parallel, concurrently. And so that was, it was a tough process to get to that point, just because I was overwhelmed with the amount of rich material we had. But hopefully I'll figure out something to do in the future with that in many, many years after this is done.
I was going to say, so this is something that, I mean, the TED Talk, if I recall correctly, was 2018, 2019. And I mean, you know, that's such a long process of getting all of these interviews and everything. How do you feel when you finally see the finished product and you get to see people's reactions to it after that long of a production cycle?
Well, I've seen about 80 versions of the finished version of the movie at this point. So by the time that last night I got to sit with an audience with it, you know, I was like, okay, the movie's out there. People are laughing at the right times. People seem to be crying at the right times. And people are so kind and so genuine as they're engaging with it already, even after just, I don't know, like 16 hours or whatever since it premiered. And so I'm really just excited to be able to sit down with an audience and see, you know, again, like, you know, how they react, because I think, you know, in the same way that I think you can go into Chasing Amy and get something out of it that you might be looking for unconsciously, or it'll confirm something that you think. I think the same thing can be said for Chasing Amy.
It has a lot to say, and I think a lot of people are going to love it. And so we talked about finding the right people to talk to and finding out which bits to include. But I'm curious, you know, much like you were saying with Riley, you know, or getting the trust there to have her in the film. I mean, how do you go about fostering that same trust with a lot of your interview subjects, especially ones who you don't get at, you know, multiple talks like Kevin and Joey and all that? How do you go about doing so?
I think the TED Talk imbued a lot of trust in the participants. You know, when you kind of put yourself out there and you're vulnerable in that way, I think it does sometimes earn a degree of trust that might not otherwise be there. But I just try to treat people kindly, and I try to, you know, say that, look, you know, you don't have to do this. Totally respectful of your time. If this works for you, great. If this doesn't, hope you have a nice day. And a surprising number of people said yes to being interviewed as a result of that. But also, you know, people did us favors. They introduced us to people. They said, hey, you want to interview this person for your documentary? They'd be a great fit. And so there's also a degree of just people being kind to our team, and people on the team being kind to me by offering and trying to leverage some of their connections or friends of friends to be able to talk to these folks.
I love when I hear people paying it forward for up and rising filmmakers like yourself.
You know what? I have a lot to pay forward as a result of this movie, because people have been incredibly generous in terms of their time and their kindness, because again, nobody had to say yes to this. This was a fairly specific idea for a movie that, you know, that people, you know, humored me on or saw the potential of, and I'm couldn't be more thankful.
Riley, I'll come back to you now. I mean, we've heard Sav's feelings about, you know, finally getting to show the movie to people and hearing the reactions. But I'm curious what it was like for you when you finally got to see the end product, so to speak, and to see how people were responding to it.
Well, I watched it first before it premiered a few months ago. I don't exactly recall. But I mean, I had heard wonderful things about it already from like collaborators and stuff. And I was like very excited to see it. Also like very nervous and like anticipation, because like you said, it had been a project that had been in the works for so long. And in a way, I didn't even really knew what to expect, because like I had been around, like floating around the process for so long. I had an idea in my head of what it was. And when I watched it, it was just something completely and absolutely different. Like the story just branched out in so many directions. and it just like I was also mind blown because I could hear his voice so clearly in the movie that I was like, as as a best friend, as a person, as his partner, just to see this come to like fruition and full circle was just like the best feeling in the world. I didn't have words to like see his voice and all his hard work just like completely like realized in front of me. And what can I say? Like he says the love letter to me and whatever, that is just uh no words. But there was also a part of me that was like, this is amazing, even with all my bias aside, because the cultural impact, the LGBT themes about this is amazing. I love it, and I genuinely want to watch it for what it is.
Well, and to give her more credit than she'll ever take, she helped every step of the way, even if she didn't know what the final edit would be. In addition to being emotional support, like, if there were ideas about a stop motion sequence, she was like helping me build miniature sets and test stuff out. Art department, like, helping me wrangle things when needed, making runs when I would need it. Every step of the way. Riley has been an invaluable part of this team in this process. And I'm just thankful for the space and the trust to just finish the movie and then show her versus, hey, let me investigate. How do I look in this scene? The way that I know I'd be tyrannical. So.
Well, I'm glad that you got to have that partnership as much in the film as outside of it. It's truly heartwarming to see you two together in this state as it is in the movie itself. And now, it's hard not to want to talk about it, but the Joey thing was quite a big deal in the film. And, looking back on it now, I'm curious, how far back was that moment in this production, and how are you feeling about it now in comparison to, in that moment?
Yeah, we shot that interview in October 2019. I don't remember the exact date off the top of my head, but it was a real game changer. In the moment, it obviously feels vulnerable and challenging, but when somebody trusts you with their story that much to be able to tell you the truth, even if it might not be the popular thing to say in that moment, maybe if it's vulnerable for you to say something like that, I'm grateful to Joey for the opportunity to hear her story and to be able to then share her story in the context of this documentary. It's incredibly meaningful. She's somebody whose work I admire deeply, and I'm excited to see, all that's coming for her, as both an actor and a director. The moment now, I'm happy with how the film turned out. I'm really grateful for Joey's, gift of feedback there, and it is unquestionably shaped the way that my life moved forward in addition to the movie. And what I always say is like, this is Joey's real life. This is my real life. This is Riley's real life, Kevin, Guinevere, and so I wanted to take that responsibility really seriously. This isn't just something that, it's not a fiction film. There's a real responsibility to everybody involved. And so we just try to do it as best we could.
Well, it's a very well-balanced film. I keep pouring praise upon you both, but I truly mean it. I can't help it.
It's so nice to hear. We've been hiding away, just making the movie for the last almost 4.5 years now. So it's so nice to be able to connect with people who've seen it.
I know. And I can't wait for people to be able to see it and for myself to spread the word about it. For my final question, before I let you both go, now that you have this film under your belt and you're, looking at more, what can we expect from you in the future?
I think you can expect a lot more sass from her. No, in terms of next stuff, I'm sure that Riley will keep working on movies with me. And I'm so thankful for that because, she's the best collaborator. She's the most fun part of my day every day.
I'm here to keep him humble.
And she knows she's the star. For me, I just want to keep telling the stories that are, joyful, optimistic, and way more about than the worst things that have ever happened to us. I think that we're a lot better in community with each other than we are isolated. And I think that's kind of a common theme of the stories that I'm really interested in telling. So regardless of if that's narrative or a documentary, I'm just stoked for, whatever happens next. And I know whatever happens next, I got the best partner in the world right next to me.
I'm glad you snuck in narrative or documentary, because that was going to be my follow-up question.
Unfortunately, I cannot say anything narratively, but I'm wishing the writers well as they strike, and I support it.
As do I. They much deserve it. So, but in the meantime, at least we have this film. People are going to get to see it soon, and I really can't wait for them to do so. So, Sab and Riley, thank you both so much for taking the time. I do truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Grant.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your time. You could be talking to anybody today, and you chose us. So thank you.